There is a photograph of a historical marker in Anaconda, Montana, that was recently widely circulated on Facebook that purports all manner of gossip, innuendo, and outright disinformation regarding Bridget Sullivan, she of Andrew Borden household fame. The person who innocently took an image of the marker wrote, "I'm from Fall River originally, but currently live in Montana. Was in Anaconda, Montana, taking a walk through the historic neighborhood and found this connection to Fall River through Lizzie Borden. I felt these two parts of my life come together. If only it were true." Here are the words making the rounds, and I mean reposted all over Facebook by individuals and even former journalists. Judge George B. Winston residence. Alice and George Winston are among the first residents of this Main Street neighborhood south of Anaconda's business district. The Anaconda Weekly Review noted in August of 1888 that the Winstons' fine home was well under construction, a lovely example of the Victorian-era Queen Anne style. The 1890s edition of the half-story complements the original front bay window and wooden window trim. George Winston served as Anaconda's first city attorney and city clerk. Winston was one of the authors of Montana's 1889 state constitution and later served as judge of the 3rd Judiciary District from 1904 until his retirement in 1932. Interestingly, the Winstons' long-time maid was Bridget Sullivan, previously employed by Andrew Borden of Fall River, Massachusetts. Borden and his wife were murdered in 1892, and Sullivan was a key witness in the trial of their daughter Lizzie. The maid never spoke of the crime, but reportedly confessed on her deathbed in 1948 that Lizzie, who was acquitted, paid Sullivan for her evasive testimony. Here is the house, 510 Main Street, Anaconda, where you can plainly see the sign on display just inside the chain-linked fence. It has been shared again and again and again, gaining notoriety and increasing conversations about not only Bridget's later work life, but how she confessed on her deathbed and was paid by Lizzie for her, quote, evasive testimony, unquote. Let's start at the end of the story, shall we? There is zero evidence that Bridget confessed anything on her deathbed to anyone about anything. At the time of her demise in 1948, Bridget was blind, cause unknown, and senile. Her immediate cause of death is listed as exhaustion, cardiac failure, chronic myocarditis due to arterial sclerosis senility. No autopsy was performed. At the time of her death, according to her death certificate, she was 73, a widow of some 9 years, married in 1905 to John M. Sullivan, and passed away in the county hospital in Butte, Montana. Her home address is listed as 112 East Woolman Street in Butte. The informant of her death was the county hospital, not an individual or a family member. The house no longer exists. John and Bridget had no children. She is buried next to her husband in Mount Olivet Cemetery in Anaconda, Montana. During the trial of Lizzie Borden in 1893, and at the inquest and preliminary hearing as well, Bridget Sullivan answered every question fully and to the best of her recollection. She was not evasive or unsure of her answers. She never wavered in her various testimonies. The transcription of her inquest appearance is lost, and no attorney or newspaperman at the time questioned her veracity or sincerity. While some of her testimony differed from that of others in small ways, she was not equivocating in her responses to either the defense or the prosecution. Anyone who says differently has not read these primary sources. When we see her date of birth on her death certificate as 1875, however, we know it to be wrong. An 1875 birth would mean Bridget would have been 18 at the time of the trial and 17 at the time of the murders. This is an impossibility. Bridget Sullivan was not a teenager during the crimes. Better evidence, I think, comes from her tombstone, which shows her date of birth as 1869. This date would make her 23 at the time of the murders and 24 at trial when she thought she was 26. Now to Bridget Sullivan's age and immigration. In her sworn trial testimony of 1893, she says she is 26 and that she has been in this country for 7 years, making an immigration date of 1886. This is from the trial transcript, pages 192 to 193. Question by Moody. What is your full name? Bridget Sullivan. And were you in the Borden household sometimes called Maggie? Yes, sir. By whom were you called Maggie? By the whole family? No, sir. By whom? By Lizzie and Emma. By Miss Emma and Miss Lizzie? Yes, sir. Won't you be kind enough to tell us how old you are, Miss Sullivan? 26 years old. I believe you have never been married? No, sir. How long have you been in this country? 6 years last May. 7 years last May. And where were you born? In Ireland. And came here 7 years ago? Yes, sir. Came to what part of this country? I came to Newport. Newport, Rhode Island? Yes, sir. Did you have folks here when you came here? No, sir. Father, mother, brother, or sisters? No, sir. And have you any here now? No, sir. I ain't got no folks here. No more than relations. When you went to Newport, did you stay there for quite a while? 12 months. And from Newport, where did you go? I went to South Bethlehem. That was in Pennsylvania? Yes, sir. When did you come to Fall River? I came here 4 years. I was 2 years out when I came to Fall River, 2 years in America when I came to Fall River. Did you go to the Bordens, the first place in Fall River? No, sir. I went to Mrs. Reed. When did you go to work for Mr. Borden? I was there 2 years and 9 months. At the time of his death? Yes, sir. Was there any other domestic servant in the family except yourself? No, sir. Not while I was there. How can someone not know their birthday? It's likely that Bridget Sullivan did not in fact know the year of her birth. This is particularly noticeable when her statements about her origins are compared to legal documents, testimony, and census records. It is not known for certain if Bridget simply didn't know when she was born or if she was asserting a right to privacy and expressing her distrust of authority by not giving an accurate accounting when asked. According to relatives, however, who I spoke to myself, not knowing one's year of birth was common in large Irish families to which Bridget belonged, due to the intense poverty that precluded the celebration of birthdays. Bridget Sullivan was one of 12 children, not an uncommon occurrence. The story that Bridget was paid off to the tune of $5,000 by the Borden sisters is the stuff of myth. Neither did she, upon her voyage to Ireland in 1895 aboard the steamer RMS Lucania, buy her family a farm. To sum up the story of Bridget's trip to Ireland in 1895, she went steerage at a cost of approximately $16.50, hardly the choice of luxurious travel for a woman of means. In addition, Irish history is clear that until 1900, individuals could not own farms in Ireland. The feudal system was still very much in place, with regions being designated by baronies. Where Bridget's family was from, Billera in Kilmarnock, Cork, the barony was Bear, which covered the northwesterly portion of the county. The Irish Land League was formed specifically to abolish landlordism in Ireland, reduce rack rents, and provide a pathway for families to own the land they worked on. It wasn't until 1902, when the Land Conference created the Land Purchase Act of 1903, that Irish tenant farmers could become landowners, purchasing their freeholds with government loans. For this reason alone, it is probable then that Bridget did not visit Ireland to purchase a farm for her parents. Neither did she, as they still say on a tour at the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, upon her return to America sometime before 1900, purchase a big ranch in Montana. Instead, we find that in the U.S. Federal Census record of 1900, that Bridget worked as a cook for a manager of a smelting company in South Butte, Montana, by the name of Richard T. Pierce. Bridget was a live-in cook and part of Pierce's household, not a ranch owner after all. She is reported to be 32 years old, with an Irish father and an Irish mother, and a U.S. immigration date of 1885. It may be through her work at this house that she met her future husband, John M. Sullivan, who was a smelterman at the copper mine. Regardless, John and Bridget were married in 1905. On her marriage license, she lists her age as 35, born to Eugene Sullivan and Margaret Leary, just like her death certificate. If Bridget Sullivan really was 26 in 1893, she would have been born in 1867, which is 2 years off from her tombstone of 1869, 8 years off from her death certificate of 1875, and 4 years off from her marriage license of 1871. So when was Bridget Sullivan actually born? Investigation is ongoing. However, all of this discussion of dates and birth and ages is not important in this case because the numbers are so close to each other. For instance, the 1900 census, taken in June of 1900, lists her as 32. If the date of her marriage license is to be believed, she would have been 29, but her census record shows a birth date of 1868, which is only 1 year away from her testimony of 1893. Confused? Well, so were the enumerators of the census during Bridget's lifetime. She invariably gave different dates for her immigration and age, which one could chalk up to her being free Irish, and thus untrusting of any government entity like a census taker. In the 1930 census, most hilariously, she lists the date of her immigration as 1892. The only reason why we need to be reasonably certain of her birth is to compare it to the page of gossip and inaccurate research at the very beginning of this story. A careful genealogist recently discovered Bridget Sullivan's baptism record from Allays, County Cork, Diocese of Kerry. Bridget Sullivan, daughter of Eugene and Margaret Leary, was baptized in March of 1864. We finally have the year of her birth. Bridget was then 28 at the time of the Borden murders, 41 on the day of her marriage, and 74 years old at the day of her death. Here is the evidence, and the only way to know that Judge George Winston had a servant whose name was Bridget Sullivan, the 1910 U.S. Federal Census. Please note that this Bridget Sullivan is listed as a member of the household living on Main Street, is 28, single, of Irish-English heritage, and emigrated to the U.S. in 1905. Her employer, George B. Winston, is judge of the district court, a man of some means and reputation. One can count on his household being properly and accurately enumerated in the census record. Here is the 1910 federal census record for Bridget Sullivan, formerly of Fall River. Note here that she is living at 412 Monroe Street with her husband, John M. Sullivan. He is a smelter. Bridget is listed as his wife of 5 years. Remember, they married in 1905, and being 40 years of age. She is of Irish heritage, just like her husband, and claims to have immigrated to the U.S. in 1890. She cannot be in two places at the same time with two different ages, two different dates of immigration, and two different marriage statuses. Ergo, the entirety of the story being circulated about the Bridget Sullivan portion of Judge George B. Winston's life is not correct. They simply got the wrong Bridget Sullivan. Had Bridget Sullivan's plans been to stay and live her life out in Ireland? What changed her mind to return to the United States? Or was her initial trip to her homeland just an intentionally temporary visit? Were there fears that kept her away from New England? And what were the circumstances that delivered her to Montana? These are not easy questions to answer about a woman who died almost 74 years ago and whose pivotal historical significance dates to the late 1800s. With a more in-depth study and concentrated search, in future episodes, I hope to be lucky enough to uncover the truth of Bridget Sullivan. A quick update. I contacted the Montana Historical Society regarding this sign in front of Judge George B. Winston's residence. They promptly returned my email and stated that they agree with my research, and indeed, they have the wrong Bridget Sullivan listed on the sign. They are going to take it down off their website, and they plan to investigate how to edit the signage in front of the house. So there you have it. It pays to do your research, it pays to ask the questions, and it pays to inform those who may in fact have made a mistake so that they can make corrections. A good ending to this story.